it was a life of nobility, but at the same time of despair. Despair because since there was no health structure anywhere, you will be surprised to hear that the person who was treating and healing a sickly and dying child was a leprosy patient.
We are so excited to have this first edition, we should call it the first edition of a cultural talk that we will be having all together. And this is a premiere for People-Centered Lighthouse, the organization that we both run. And the idea behind this first edition of the cultural talk is to have a revival or a revamping of the African culture. And this is in line with People-Centered Lighthouse goals to promote our African cultures and to just make sure that as we are moving to other countries, while we are embracing or integrating the other cultures, we do not miss out on our culture. And so it is in that, within that backdrop that this event is organized. And so we are so excited to have with us tonight three very important personalities. I call them personalities because of not only the contributions that they have made in Africa, in our communities in Africa, but also even here, right here in the United States. And so without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our panelists. And so I'm going to start from the young, dynamic gentleman who is seated on that other side, Mr. Hubert Ndifusa. Right? Mr. Hubert Ndifusa is presiding over a cultural association called the Bangolan Cultural Association. Right? And he has been, I think he's going into his second or third mandate. So that is self-explanatory. No further introduction is needed from that perspective. And then on this side, we have Mr. Kingo Anderson, who is another dynamic president of another association, African or Cultural Association, which is called the Mfoya Cultural Association. And by profession, he is an IT expert. You know, and we have finally Dr. Tatanga Henry. So it would take us a whole book. It would take us a whole book to introduce Dr. Tatanga. But the least I can say about Dr. Tatanga, because I think I'm going to give him a chance to say something about himself, but the least I can say about Dr. Tatanga is that he's a reservoir of knowledge. Yeah. And so we are so honored, we are so privileged to have you be part of this event. And so I don't know if Dr. Tatanga, would you like to say something more about you?
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's always very difficult if you are an African to be saying something about yourself when in actual fact people should be talking about you. But I look at myself as a cultural seed planter. Because I have seen life to be an intertwining of two words, hope and despair. When you hear about despair, you will be sad. But that sadness, that despair can be the cause of the hope that is going to come. And that is how optimistic I look at life. And that is why I have spent all my time learning. And my culture has become Christianity.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Tatanga. Thank you so much for that intertwined, the intertwined and very rich introduction of yourself. I don't know if the other panelists would like to add something. Maybe I missed something out in the course of introducing you. Is there any other thing maybe you would like to add to that introduction that was made earlier?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a speaker in this event. So it's a very good idea to come up with something like this and to help everybody, not those that are coming from Africa, but other parts of the world, to understand where their roots are from and how culture can be very important in their lives, not only when they are young, but also when they grow up and how they interact with each other in the world. So without much to say, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. President, Mr. Anderson. Mr.
Like Dr. said, it's hard for us where we come from to be talking about ourselves. We think other people do that, and that's just the beginning of the definition of culture, right? Our culture. You allow other people to talk about you, and then let them define you better than you can do. And I also want to say that I'm president of Bangolan community in Texas, which is Bangkok.
Wow, wow. See, that's very important. So, and one of the things that we can gather from this interaction tonight is that there's going to be a lot to unpack. And so I would submit to you the following structure of how we are going to unfold tonight. And so we are going to converse around four main themes. The first one is sharing personal experiences. And the second one is how these experiences shaped your life. And then we have the third theme is what the African generation in the diaspora are missing out on. And then finally, the fourth theme is going to be what can be done for the younger generation to be more acculturated today, and also some lifelong values for the future generation. So those are the points that we have in mind. And the idea is that at the end of this session that we're having, of which this is just one of the many other sessions that we will be having with our community and our people, we are also looking forward tonight to have solutions to some of the developments that will be coming up in terms of what we can learn from the values of our rich culture, but also what can be passed down to the younger, I don't know what young really means, but the growing generation, because you have other people who might be older, but they have not had the opportunity to grow up in Africa, and so they may not really know culture from that African standpoint. And so, but this is going to be a blessing to many other people. So that's what we are looking forward to unpack tonight.
Yeah, so I am super excited about this time, and I cannot wait to, kind of relive culture, because when I think about my time back home, it was beautiful, and how my parents would take us back home and we will experience life in the village and even in the city, but having those cultural values from the different people that we were introduced to and all of that, it was so much that we learned. And being here, it is a very great challenge to be able to keep it up, or to revive that culture. So we want to truly appreciate you guys being here, all of you being here, and we trust that we are all going to be edified, and many others are going to be edified. So without much ado, we're gonna start with the first question, and please, let's start maybe this way. If you can share with us some of your experiences that you had living back home in Africa, in Cameroon precisely, and specifically, if you can share with us like your house setting, your living room, your kitchen, your attic, a little bit about those details so that we can get at least a brief picture of how life was, back home.
No, thank you for the question. So I'll start by saying that, let me say, when we grew up in Cameroon, to be precise, Bamenda, my dad comes from Mbengui. My mom comes from Bafo, and I grew up in a different village, which is Bambui, and sometimes I look at that as one of my villages, but I very much appreciate Bambui as a village because that's where I grew up my entire life. I did visit like Mbengui once in a while, and also Bafo is one of the places where I grew up as well because Bambui is next to Bafo. So we just walk down the street and right there in Bafo. So that is where I grew up. So talking about a little bit of experiences in terms of where I lived. So we had let me say about 4-bedroom house in Bambui, and it was pretty much an experience that right now is pretty much different from what we have in the United States. Very different. So as we all know, in Cameroon, sometimes there is no light.
Yes.
No light. And the light can go off for like a couple of days without coming back. And what we use then is what they call like a lamp. Just to see places and do things at night. And sometimes back in the days, there was no phone to use. So there is no means of communication if somebody is not close to you. So it was very tough.
So you had to maybe go down the road and...
Yes, you have to maybe go down the road just to get the attention of someone, or something like that. So switching gears a little bit, I also had the chance to spend time with my grandmother, which she's from Bafo, and precisely Fonta. That is one of the villages in Bafo, or one of the quarters in Bafo, which is Fonta. So when I was growing up, I usually just take some time just to go down and sit with my grandmom to understand how things are unfolding in terms of culture and also in terms of the relationship with the palace. And how we can interact with one another, my cousins, and sometimes we have like, let me say, holidays that we go to Fonta to visit. And what I would say is, there was one thing that always pulled me to that village or to that quarter. We had like mango. Do you know mango?
Yes.
Yes. So mangoes, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we had like multiple trees, so many trees, types of mangoes. I don't know how they call it back in those days, but they have different categories of it. So even when I come back from school, that always pushes me to go down and say, okay, let me harvest some mangoes and come back home with it for us to eat. And not to divert a little bit, but my dad had a very big farmyard, which was about more than 4 miles away from the house, which was very difficult for us to get up in the morning and go to the farm. Not in America right now, even if you have a farm, you can drive your car and go there.
That's right.
Drive your car and go there and do what you want to do.
And Mr. Ngo, if you don't mind, so we are going to be talking about the people that actually impacted your life,
Sure.
like growing up. But at this point, we wanted to understand a little bit the house setting
Okay.
Like how was that house setting? Because, for example, for Americans or people from other cultures, not necessarily Africans, but people from other cultures, they may not have that picture of that house setting. They might be looking at the house setting in terms of there's an AC in and you have all the lightings, and I'm sure you mentioned growing up with a lamp.
Yes.
But they might not have the same structure of the house. So could you?
Yeah, washer and dryer here.
Right, they have a washer and dryer, and you know, could you dive a little bit deeper into that house structure, how it was? I know you mentioned your father had a house of 4 rooms.
Yes.
Did it have I slept on bamboo bed at some point, and I don't know how I can put bamboo bed in an American context, because I've not seen a bamboo bed in America. But what other things were like in your home that you now being in America, it's that is a unique structure?
Yes. Growing up, as I earlier mentioned, we had 4 bedrooms, right? We never had a TV. Let me say, like a couple of years before the life emerges, like let me say 10 years ago, 12 years ago, in terms of TV. Even the TV that we have right now, we have the flat screen TVs. Out back there, we had like the olden days TV and also radios to listen to radio channels. Within the settings as well, we had 4 beds, but the only time I would say we had furnitures, right? But when I usually visit my grandma, that's where I slept on a bamboo bed. Yes. So yeah, that's how it was. And in terms of water, we had water in our house, like tap water.
Okay.
Yes. We never had microwaves. I came to America before I used my first microwave.
I too.
Yes.
I used my very first microwave in the United States.
In the United States.
Yeah.
That's when I used my first microwave. Even the dishwasher. I never knew it was dishwasher. And also, we usually use just regular sponge just to get tap water and rinse the plate and all that.
Wow, but Mr. Ngo, I would say you were very fortunate if you really used sponge, because if I remember, in my experience, we used to cut cocoyam leaves sometimes. We used to cut cocoyam leaves or palm tree, whatever you call them, leaves,
Yes.
and smooch them all together to be able to scrub. I won't say plates, because at Chu, which is the food that we eat it on leaves, you know. So, but whenever we had the privilege, it's not that we never ate on plates, but whenever we had those plates, we'll use those kind of natural elements, and sometimes camel wood, not that, charcoal, as soap to kind of make it. That's the
yes,
reality
like when you
that
have oil on the plate.
That's right.
There's no soap to even use it. You have to use like some of those charcoal to even clean up
Exactly.
the back of the pot and all that stuff.
Exactly.
So
would you share the same thought, like in terms of your setting, your house setting? How was it like? How unique was it?
I want to say thank you for this opportunity. It's a huge opportunity. Someone like me that I'm a leader of a community that I'm striving so hard that we should not forget where we come from and the things that we do. This is huge for me. Not that I'm just campaigning for that community. I think that it's very important that we understand that as we grow up, we should pass down what we know to our children, that we can pass down to the coming generation. But going back to the question, I think the way I grew up, I would say I grew up in a dual setting. Dual setting in the sense that I grew up in the city and in the village. And city was mostly my school days, and the village was mostly my holidays. And since the city not completely close to what we already have in the United States, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the village, which is way from what we have here. And so most of the time that I spent in the village was spent in a situation whereby we have my grandmother's house, my paternal grandmother's house, that was a 2-bedroom house. That 2-bedroom house, at any point in time, we always have at least 12 people. and that meant that a single bedroom will probably have at least 6 people. So 3 sleeping on the bed that was in the room at the time, and probably 3 are sleeping on the mattress on the floor. And you probably have a couple sleeping on one couch in the living room. And then my grandmother had her own room. And so this was setting and talking about.
So how many people are we talking about? Like in the same
house at any point in time was at least 12 people.
At least 12 people.
Yes, 12 people.
And how many rooms?
2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms.
2 bedrooms.
So 12 and 2. So basically 6.
6. Well, technically not 6.
Okay, there was a living room.
There was a living room, and if you were young enough, if you were younger, you will be opportunity to sleep with my grandmother. But if you're a little bit older and you could survive the cover, the blanket that was lighter, you would sleep in the other room. And so that was the general setting when it comes to living room. We didn't have tap water at the level of the village. There was a community water that grace to people like doctor and the other elite to my village. They made that possible. But generally, that water will flow. Will flow probably once a day. But within like 1 hour or 2, and it's done. If you don't go to get water at that time, you have to go to the stream. And this stream was just probably a mile or 2 away from home. And
you have to walk.
Yeah, definitely you have to walk to the stream and fetch your water and come back home. Cooking and firewood and kitchen and things like that. There was no gas. There was literally no stove, not to talk about gas and gas bottles. So we did what they call 3-stone fireside. So if you understand what I mean, just 3 stones and you put your pot on it and firewood under it and you can cook. And that's how it was.
Wow.
I would say my grandmother was fortunate enough in the village to have a detached kitchen. And most of the people that I saw in the village, their kitchen was joined with the living room at the same time. So, and this kitchen is, like I said, it's not the American kind of kitchen. It's not even the city kind of kitchen. It's a kitchen where you're cooking right there, and the smoke is coming up, and the other people are sitting. And so we were fortunate to have that kitchen, and we just separated, detached, and we could go get food from there. So that is literally how the village setting was. Yaoundé was, the city, which is Yaoundé in this case, was a bit different, a little more comfortable because there were a lot more rooms, a lot more people, but a lot more rooms. You had the opportunity to be able to maybe share a room, just 2 people, but the difference with the village was obvious.
That's very interesting. Dr. Katana, I know your generation is, like, I would call you daddy, which speaks volume to the generational gap. Would you weigh into these experiences that a much younger generation than yours have shared in terms of your house setting?
As a matter of fact, what they are describing is despair. But the village I grew in at my time, the compound had the father's house, and every wife had her house.
When you say every wife, could you emphasize a little bit on that?
Well, my mom has never been a wife alone to her husband. And I know that the last but one wife that my father had was actually looked for by my mother when my father was in prison. That was despair. But that prison was going to be the thing that makes me what I am today.
Okay, and that's very important, Dr. Tetanga. Now you mentioned that, just to clarify, because many people who are viewing this or who are listening to you may not understand. My father had many wives, and so that's why I wanted to open and close that bracket before we can pivot back to your house setting, because in the second portion we're going to emphasize on the people that actually had an impact on your life.
The people that had an impact on my life.
The house setting.
Yeah, well, I'm going from there to go to the house setting.
Okay.
Because it started from birth.
Okay.
One of my father's wives, who had no child, I got the story afterwards that she was my mother. That is the person to whom I owe my life. So that's when the impact starts. And that was my father's first wife. Then my mother came afterwards. My family was a noble family, so to say. Noble family because my father made himself noble. He never ate together with the children. I only became an adult before I could sit with my father and eat in the same bowl. The children ate together and they sat around, and each person was fighting out what they could take. And of course, when my dad finished eating, she never emptied the bowl. He will call a child, then you come and take the rest of the food. Food was never finished. And then, when you were too much with your mother, when he called you to come and get the food, then he will insult you that you are always with your mother. No father calls a child for advice. So you ought to be coming and getting advice. And so he was an outward-looking person, a trader going to Nigeria and buying clothes, but at the same time a seed planter. Whenever he went for trade, he came back with seeds or seedlings. And so as he was talking about a farm, I lived in an orchard that had pears, had mangoes, had oranges, had plums, had pineapples. The fence itself was pineapple. He built a fence, but planted pineapples along the fence. And I grew up and planted palm trees within my father's compound, and the palm trees are still being harvested today. The oil that my parents use come from those palm trees. And so it was a life of nobility, but at the same time of despair. Despair because since there was no health structure anywhere, you will be surprised to hear that the person who was treating and healing a sickly and dying child was a leprosy patient. His nose was all torn and open, his fingers were all cut, his hands, his feet were all cut, but that's the person who was treating me. And that is why I said there is a dimension of us which gives hope that even though those things happened, I didn't die. I didn't catch leprosy. I was told, children needed to be nursed by a girl, generally, who came from your family. And my mother caught my nurse actually putting mucus in my mouth, and this mucus came from whooping cough because the mother who she was living with had whooping cough. But I didn't catch with whooping cough.
Wow.
So that life that I lived, my parents became very sensitive to death. And so they sent me to go study the Quran to prepare for life after death.
Wow.
And I went away from home and lived in the Hausa quarter in the village and forgot my mother tongue. Then What happened for me to come back was that the man went because he was a nomad, all right? He went away, and about 6 years after, I needed to be circumcised. And circumcision is one of the things that they do to a boy. And at my time, there was a very far away hospital, as Banso Baptist Hospital today. There was no road going there. So they had to go on foot. And when they got there, they were told to come back in 2 weeks to get circumcision.
Oh, wow.
They brought me back, and a circumciser in the village circumcised me.
Okay, so what I understand, Dr. Tutanda, what I understand is that the people, because you've emphasized the place of the people that played a significant role in your life. I think it's very emotional. It's at the same time humbling, even to listen to the experience of the person, someone having leprosy, but whose condition would not even permit them to take care of themselves, but take care of some other person. So what kind of home structure was it? What kind of house structure was it that all of these people were interacting? What was the dynamics of the home structure?
We call that a compound.
Okay.
And these young people are talking about a house where there are many people living. But no, in the village, it was a compound. And the compound head had his house and built a house for each of his wives. The house was a kitchen, quite all right, but the mother's house, she lived there with her children. And of course, they took turn to go to their husband's house. And the husband, because my parents were Muslims, the houses of the wives were behind, and the house of the father was in front. So he was the protector.
In front would be with respect to the main road?
Yeah, the main road.
Okay.
If you are coming, you come to the father's house before you go to the back to meet the wives. And so my father had many wives and girlfriends too. Well, because at that time there was no, the thinking is not what we have today. It's not what we had today. Once they told me I was very sick and dying, they took me to Banso Baptist Hospital, which was being established at that time. You could not even think about the circumcision at that time. But there was a fence, and there was a guard, and they got there in the night, and the guard drove them. And they had to come back with me weeping. And they came and slept in my father's girlfriend, who was a prominent woman going to Onisha and buying clothes and coming and selling. And so since he was a trade partner with my father, so my father didn't hide that to his wife. So we came and slept there, and they tell me the story how we got there, and I opened my eyes and started suckling again, and I didn't take any treatment, and that episode.
Wow.
was
And
resolved that way.
what kind of bed were you sleeping on? And what kind of what was the cooking? How were your parents or your mother or the mothers? What were they using to cook?
Well, for the house of the mother had a fireside, and the fireside had stones standing on it, and on the stone the pot was put, and the fire was under it.
Are we talking about a clay pot?
Yeah, it was a clay pot.
Okay.
It was later on that some kind of brass-made pots were brought from abroad. I mean, my father, who was going out and doing business, brought those things. So they became, it moved from, it was not just clay pot, but a kind of cement-like material which they used to make the pot. I think there was a technology of making pot at that time, and the making of the pot had to pass through burning in fire so that it can stand the heat of fire.
Yeah, since you have, I mean, this is just amazing. There's so many things I'm learning myself. Sharing with us all your experiences. Since we already dived into, relationships, and that you shared to us, some of the relationships that impacted your life. Do you want to come in at that level as well and share with us like some of those relationships that truly made you who you are today?
Yes, thank you once more for that question. Let me say back in the days when I grew up in Cameroon, the main thing that I would say my life today shaped from is Christianity. Christianity was the key, and up to today I still thank my mom the way I was brought up. I was brought up in such a way that every day we need to make sure that we study the Bible. We have praises at home, and also we go to church every Sunday. So if you have something to do when it's Sunday, just forget about it, because after you go to the place, you come back, you're not going to sleep in the house. So with that being said, that was the most impactful thing in my life, and I still live with it up to today, of which even right now my mom is in the United States, and there has never been a time or a Sunday that I will sit at home and don't go to church. I will have to go to church, and that's what shaped my life in terms of how I look at things in the world. Yeah.
Wow,
It's awesome.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. Do you want to share with us your experience?
I think that the setting that I grew up in really defined what led to the people that cared for me and made me who I am. I grew up in almost a similar setting, maybe a newer version of what Dr. grew up in, where we're in a polygamous home where my dad had non-4 wives and non-numbers of wives down outside. And so because of that, and my dad passed away when I was like 9 or 10, and I was the first in my mom's house. And because I was the first in my mom's house, I took up the responsibility of a family in my house. And because of that, I took the culture of respect that we have at the level of the village and merged it with religion and spirituality and Christianity, and respected my mom, and my mom being a Christian too, really used that to impact me and help me grow and build that relationship between the two of us. So it is that relationship between my mom and myself, seeing me not just like a son, but like a husband, somebody that's leading her home and giving me the respect that I needed, that really moved me and made me who I am. This is from her behaving appropriately, so that I will not be able to question her, and using that as an example for me to follow while in school and even back home.
Wow, that's very, very touching. And I can see, like from what has been said, one thing that kind of transpires, it is that strong bond, strong family bond, and also that connection with the people, either the parents or the other uncles or aunties that intervened in your life. So would you say, for example, that you had many parents or many aunties or many sisters? And if you say that, what is the perspective behind it? Because, for example, certain cultures, a sister is a sister, a brother is a brother. Your cousin is not your brother, it's your cousin. So how do you put like this kind of experience as an enriching experience for you?
So I would say, Hillary Clinton said it right, that it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, my village was a microcosm of that, in the sense that I said I grew with my mom was in the city, and I just said I lived a dual life, When I was in the village, I was living with my uncles, my uncle's wife, whom I would never refer to as my uncle's wife. I always refer to as my parent, as my mom. And in fact, to add to it, that when my dad passed away, my uncles came to our lives, and today we still call them Papa, which in our culture it means father. So they have really played a huge role in our life. And growing up in the village, one of the things that I realized in my compound is that nobody, when you are doing something wrong, you don't expect your mom to scold you on what you were doing. You expect anybody in the community who is matured and know what is wrong and what's right and wrong to school you. And so the parenting or the caring or the bond was not just between you and your mom. Your mom was just the main part, but there were other people that were playing huge roles in our lives.
Anybody wants to add to that?
Yeah, let me just add that the life in the village was an open air life. The children, the women went to the farms, and the children remained behind. And they remained behind, bigger children taking care of the younger children, and they moved from compound to compound, and they went up trees and harvested fruits and did whatever thing they did. They went shooting birds and so on and so forth. And nobody ever heard that a child was missing.
That's true.
Wow.
You could never hear that a child was missing. Missing how?
Yes.
That was the power of the community.
Yeah, the power of the community. If you came back in the night and your children were not in, they were big enough to go visit. Because you knew your aunties and all those people as your mothers, and when you grew to a certain age at night, that's visiting time. And if you are not going to dance in the open air when the moon was shining, and girls will come out and they will be dancing and falling and catching each other and things like that. Okay, so that was the life in the village. And I say, I told you that Christianity became my culture, but not my culture without the culture, because I know you have no culture if you don't have a language.
That's right.
I whipped them in France to learn Bangolan, because when I spoke Bangolan,
you whipped the moderator?
when she was a baby, all right? Because I spoke Bangolan to them and they laughed, so I had to be serious.
It was fun.
Okay, so now they know the culture, and she is interested in the culture. You were talking about Bafut. Bafut and Bangolan came from Nduru. And that was Usman Danfodio jihad war that drove them from there. So when the Bangolan people came and settled where they settled, the Bafut people said, well, those red-mouthed people are still coming. So they continued. And then they went and settled much further away where they are today, and the Bangolan people were actually followed up and chased out of their village. And it was the Germans who brought them back to their village in 1911. So studying the Quran made me a child of anybody who knew the Quran in the village. So I studied the Quran from every Malam. They call them Malams. That's the person who has studied the Quran.
That would be the version like of a pastor?
Yeah, that's the pastor. That's a Muslim scholar.
Yes.
He has learned the Quran. And so he's teaching it to you. Even though the Quran was never taught in your language, it was Arabic, and they taught things to you that you didn't actually understand what they were saying because you were just memorizing. Okay, besides that, when by the age of 10, I didn't appear to have died because I was being prepared for life after death.
Yeah.
So I survived. And because I survived, my father was a trader. He used to go to Nigeria, buy clothes. The customs were living in my village because the French side and the English side were separated by a river. And so the French are where the health center, Baptist Health Center is today. The king of the locality, which we call the Bamu, their king is a sultan and also a king. A sultan is a Muslim spiritual person. So his emissaries, his messengers carried clothes and they would cross it. The customs impounded on those clothes and say you need to show the tax that you have paid, and they didn't show and they seized the clothes. Then they sold the clothes to the villagers who were selling clothes, and my father was one of them. So he bought material that he didn't know that was illegal. And then when investigations were done and they found it, he found himself in prison. They fined them 50 British pounds, or you go to prison for 3 months. But we are talking about how meaningful people are. My father's junior sisters had their children were living with him. My mother's junior brother, they were also living with him, and they were selling his clothes. So he could take the chance of saying, for 3 months, I will not earn 50 pounds selling those clothes. Wow. So he decided to go to prison. All the others in the village came back. Okay. But because he went to prison and saw warders, they made him a chief in a prison yard. And the communication through the warders to the prisoners of that side were through him. But he never went to school. So he now began to discover that the world that we are living in today, the generation of my children, we need English. Then he came back, called me by his side, and asked me whether I want to go and learn English. I didn't know what it meant, but I just accepted. And that's how I went to the only Baptist school in the village. And a Muslim, if he didn't take preparation for life on earth seriously through learning English, he would not send me to a mission school. That's where I continued learning Islam. Then I discovered the Bible because we had a course called ECL, Education and Christian Living. I compared preparation for life after death using the Bible, then compared what was said about Islam, and I knew that Muhammad died and was buried. And I said, if Jesus Christ died and woke up and went to heaven and said he's going to prepare a place for me, why should I go with a dead person? that was a reasoning at that time. I didn't imagine how I came to that reasoning.
Wow, that's really
all right.
That's very powerful. So to continue in that same vein, if I may ask, I would like us to touch a little bit on the health aspects. Like you mentioned so many times, like being sick or having somebody who had a very serious condition. So I'd like us to talk about the health facilities. And the second aspect, which I would like us to touch to close up with this first portion, is the interaction between the different cultures. Like you had religion, I would say Western religion that came over, and that met the tradition practices of the people there. So I would like us to touch on that mixture. Start with the president, Mr. Anderson Gore, and then we move this way and this way.
Yes, so let me say, I'll start with the second part of the question.
Okay.
Yes, then I'll move to the first part. So, so in terms of how or what facilities we had in terms of hospitality and linking that to the different Christianity lives that we had when we were little, or when I was growing up. Let me say, when I was growing up, most of the time when I was ill, and my mom told me this, I was very sick when I was little. And I was the only person that was giving them trouble in terms of health issues. But
so you're a miracle child.
I'm a miracle child. But right now I can say that in terms of sickness, nobody will avoid sickness, but I will say that, okay, I haven't had issues for a while.
Wow.
Yes. But when I was little growing up, my mom told me that she always walked with me from one health center to the next.
Okay. And by health center, you mean like, is it
Like a little tiny, when I say health center, like probably they won't have all of these amenities, like let me say doctors and all that. They'll have just like little nurses that will take care of you.
Okay.
That time, when they say nurse, it's not like you go to school to become a nurse, right? They'll have just people or individuals that have just the volunteer, just the general talent to take care of people. Yeah, so when I was growing up, like let me say when I was around 10, 15 years, one of my father's friend opened a hospital in Bamenda, which that was the hospital that we usually go to for any health issues. And I would say at that time it was a little bit up to standard. And that was really good because each time my dad would say, hey, you guys need to just go to my friend, right, if you have any issue. But I remember when I was playing what we call it back home football, but now they call it soccer in America. And I had this injury on my leg. It was really bad. But you know what, guess what? My mom took care of that by herself at home because there was no possibility for us to go to the hospital at that time.
So what kind of medication was she using to take care of that?
Good question, because back home at that time we had this herbal medicine like grass, like herbal medication like leaves.
Yes.
They will go to the bush and harvest the leaves and apply them to the injured area.
Wow.
And it will heal up. And that was really, it healed very fast, more than I would guess the regular.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Wow, that's very impressive.
Yes.
Very, very impressive. Mr.
Yeah,
Philip.
the two questions were.
So the two questions, so the first one is like the healthcare setup. Like if you were sick or had any disease or something, how would you be taken care of? And then the second part is like the interaction between the Western culture, the local or the native cultures. How did you deal with that? Or how did you experience
The
that?
second part, I didn't get that. I think the first part, which is about health setup, this really, I think a doctor is in a good place to give that, because the structure that we had then with what we have today, there's really no big difference. Yeah, and because of that, I would say that if you go to my village, the health center that I grew up in is the same one that we have in the village. The only difference is that there are multiple of them now.
Okay.
And so, because there are multiple of them, I wouldn't say that that's a major change, but the structure itself is the same, right? So, at the level of the village, there was a health center, which there is a health center today. And it was mostly mission health centers. These are people that were in the course of spreading the gospel, will come and plant a church, then you will move to a school, then a health center, and then at the level of the village, if you're sick and you're sick, it's light. I don't know what's the definition of a light sickness, but it was considered as light sickness. You can be taken care of at the level of that village, because this health center is probably going to be 3 or 4 huge halls, and these halls will have multiple beds, and the people that was broken down in a technical way, maternity, we have a big hall with all the women that give birth. and they have another hall which probably is handling people with wounds, and another hall, just like a makeshift kind of a setup.
Yeah, yeah.
Then when your case is bad, they will take you to a hospital.
They can refer you, right?
They can refer you,
Yeah.
they will refer you to a hospital, which is what doctor was talking about. They take you to a bouncer hospital then. But we also had situation where doctors will leave those hospitals and come to the health centers on specific days. So it's probably going to be once in a month where they will come down to the village and they will do consultations and all of that and take care of the people that were sick. So that's a health setup that I grew up, and I'm mindful of the fact that my mom is a nurse and then and is still a nurse today. It made me to understand, even though she wasn't working in the village, but while I was in the village, those are the experiences I had. But when I felt sick, what I've understood, what I know is that we try to manage it at home first before we took it to the hospital. So if you have a wound, my grandmother always have a remedy ready to go that they will use it on your body first. If it doesn't work, then they go to the hospital. If you have fever, they will boil a pot of concoction and cover a blanket over it.
And that works.
That worked.
Yeah, it worked.
And just to say that, I had COVID. You're fine. I'm negative now. I had COVID, and my wife did the same thing for me here.
Wow.
And
So she covered you with
she
a
covered me
blanket.
with blanket and a lot of concoction. that was, I mean,
That's full disclosure.
the mind. I think then my understanding from the explanation was that when you are under that heat, you sweat, and that sweat is going to bring out everything that you have in you. I think doctor is going to elaborate more on that. So that is the health setup that I grew up in. Talking about conflict between how the culture or the Christianity and the religion that we had in the ground was, and I was fortunate enough that my father was one of the people in the palace. The palace is where we have the chiefs, which it's like the king of the village where they live, and they have their own gods that they worship. And my father introduced me to that when I was growing up, but it was conflicting with my Christianity because my grandmother would tell me, hey, you can't go worship the God in the church and go worship the God in the palace. That was her understanding then, but I don't know the details about that, and I don't know how that works today, but that is the kind of setup that we had. And the mindset was that if you are a Christian, then you're not supposed, you can be in the palace, but you are not allowed to worship the God of the palace, the God of the village itself. And in my own compound, we had our own God. We had our own God that he called him down, that he had built, and people would go in there and consult and do and pour libation. And we also
What kind of libation?
Libation most of the time was palm wine. Sometimes it was blood, color nut. It was blood from chickens and things like that. And we actually had one at home that we do.
Would you call it a shrine?
That I think that is the word I was supposed to use.
Okay.
Yeah, a shrine. And a shrine. And two, we also believed a lot in the dead, right? That if this person is dead, they are still here with us and they're seeing us. So people always go there and confess and say, hey, I've done this, can you forgive me, and things like that. So that is how that's that spiritual aspect of school.
Wow. Thank you. Before we go to Dr. Tanga, I know you maybe wanted to mention the conflict between and I know you didn't bring that up. Did you want to catch up with that before we go to Dr. Tanga?
Sure. So I think it's very much aligned to what you just mentioned about living the Christianity life versus what you have in the palace, like the palace setting. Where when I say palace, it's like the cultural, like the village setting, the cultural setting versus the Western culture, which is the Christianity type of thing.
Okay.
So I grew up in those two settings as well. So in where I grew up, we had like death celebrations. We know about death celebrations, right?
Yes.
So within the death celebrations, they have, the funniest thing is they have like the Western culture, which is the Bible, the pastor will preach, and at the same time they will have this cultural event that comes in, like, I'll call it juju, that comes in and perform all of that. But right up to now, I don't know the answer to that. To be sincere, that is the setting how I grew up in.
Well, I'll take a step back because there are stages that I witnessed, and even the stage before me. That stage is a period when the people never believed anybody died of illness. So you are talking about medicine and all that. That anybody died of illness. So you are eaten. That's the literal thing, all right? So if somebody died, the palace will come into play, and they will bring some concoction for you to drink. If you drank and something happened to you, then you ate that person. Okay, so.
And so, Dr. Tekana, just to precise, the eating that person is kind of in quote. It's not like the literal eating of the person.
No, that is the literal word.
Yes.
That's the literal word that is used. They say he is eaten. And so, when they say that he is eaten, it's mystical. It is not that they know that you came and ate somebody.
Very good. So I wanted to bring that to our viewers.
Yes.
So that
They can understand.
they understand
That's right.
that it wasn't like
That's right. So,
cannibalism.
since we're talking about culture, we will translate what the people say in the culture.
Yes,
That's right.
They
exactly.
say in the culture somebody is eaten.
That's right.
Okay, because of that, how did it affect some people like women? If a woman got married and she's going to deliver a child, or she does not deliver a child, there must be something that happened in their home for that to happen. So she might be banned from going to her parents. So virtually she cannot visit her parents. When there is you were visiting your parents and then you are pregnant and they are afraid that you may lose the child for some reason because it was frequent at that time, then you will be banned from going to your parents. It was almost as though it was always the parent of the woman who are, and that had something that did not really match with the reality that the problem was coming from her. That was another means of controlling her. Because for her to leave from her parents and she's going back there and where I'm visiting her mother is coming, the husband and the husband's family, they wouldn't want that.
Okay.
And so they will prevent her from having any contact with her parents. And the condition, the fact is that she might not have a child, or she might have a child and the child she will abort, or she might have a child and the child dies a child, and so on and so forth. So there would always be some mystical reason why somebody dies. Okay, but then when when a child fell sick, the practical way they handled it was to wait.
Oh,
Yes, they waited.
waited for a while.
Well, to see whether the thing will go. Right? To see whether the thing, I mean, immune system functions, right?
Right.
They have lived and seen that sometimes you have a child is attacked by something and then he gets well.
Yeah.
I told you they carried me from Banso coming back when I was sick until the night watchman say you wait with the child until he's dying, you are bringing him here for what? Go away from here. So they went back and then I got well on the road. So the lesson they learned from there is that God can intervene. all right? So something can happen beyond them. But
I'm sorry, when was it judged critical that it should be
when you
at
are
this point
dying,
that-
when you are no longer eating, when you know, I mean, they give you breast and you don't take the breast, and they see you are dying, all right? So I mean, that's why sometimes they will go out in the night, and where are they going to? They are going to see some Gambian person who is going to say, who is doing this?
And by Gambian person here, you're referring to
A soothsayer.
a soothsayer
Yes.
who had authority.
Of course, they knew that person as having some power.
Right.
Because when they had, at a certain point when they had an illness, he will prescribe something. And sometimes the medicine that they prescribe will be strange, all right?
So, but sometimes the situation got better.
Yeah, of course.
And
I mean, you can get sick of backache in the house, and somebody is treating you at the back of the house. You know, he's not touching you, but the treatment is being done
At a distance.
at a distance.
Wow.
All right.
And so this kind of all this that happens. So I would imagine that with Christianity coming in, so how was the interaction between these two?
Well, when Christianity just came, you still had the people. And if there was no health center anywhere, you don't expect them to turn overnight and because they have become Christian to become somebody else. They are still the people of that village, right? But then, since missionaries came, and then they began to introduce schools, and then they began to introduce health center. That is when they are overtaken, their soothsayers have been consulted several times and it is not working. Then they now decide to go to the health center. And that is how I said they carried me to Banso and they brought me back. Now, this finger tells a story about health centers. The health center that came, well, about religion and about health center. There are two things joined here on this broken finger. The first attack on that finger was punishment that was given to me. I was a Muslim child and I could not go to church. I was punished in school for not going to church. And that punishment was for me to carry stones because the school was under construction. So to carry stones and put, they are going to use that stone to lay the foundation or do something. So I carried the stone. When I climbed on the pile, and I slipped and fell, and the stone hit this finger on the stone, and it cracked there at that place. Then it healed. One day on Sunday, which was a market day, I wasn't going to church, but I went fishing. I went to the fishing ground, and a young man was standing by. This is a river, and there is grass on this side, grass on this side. We stand inside there, you cannot, drown. So I'll cut the grass here. This other young man will cut the grass there and the pool. So the fish that was on the mud will trickle in and you can catch it. So as I cut and he cut, the grass was pulled and a small fish was trickling down. And I sent my hand there and he was cutting and it caught just that finger. Then I carried it on my head and went to the health center, and the health center had a nurse, a male nurse. That was the first nurse in that health center. He had no clue what he would do with it. So that's how the finger remained like this. And I said, well, this is the finger on which my wedding ring.
That's really the good part.
Right?
That's the good part of the.
And then it began to grow a little bit. And as it grew, the ring can no longer come out. I will need to cut it to come out. So that is the story of the health center. It started at a time when the nurse could not attend to things that were beyond their training and beyond the equipment that was available, beyond anything that they could do. Okay, but it grew, people were trained, like his mother, and they were nurses. The diaspora's wife is here now, but she was working in that health center. So, well, after looking at all what happened to me, I said, I am surviving because I went to school. And the only school that was there was a Baptist school. And I said, well, I should help other children to go to school so that they can learn and survive the situation that I went through. And of course, by 2009 when I came here, from the one school, we had 14 schools in that village. But development is not a 100-meter race.
That's right.
It's a marathon race.
Right.
And so you can build the mansion and it gets up tall, right up there, and then it's broken down by the same people you were building for.
That's right.
It's not unfortunate.
Yeah.
But this is a lot of great information that we have gathered from all the background and your experiences. It's just amazing. But now for the younger generation here in the United States, what are they really missing out on? I know that some of them were either born here or some of them grew up here, they came here while they were very young. Probably they don't have those experiences, and I believe it's very important for them. But it's hard for them to actually experience that. So, but what are they missing out on, and what can be done so that they can still have those values that were learned?
The first thing that they are missing did not start here.
And on that note, Dr. Latanga, would you mind if we listen to
That's right.
Yeah,
and go this way and
Yeah,
have your
correct.
thoughts on that, please?
That's right.
Okay. So come again with your question.
Yeah, so what are the younger generation here in the United States or in the diaspora missing out on, with all the experiences and values that were experienced, in Africa and back home, and everything that was learned that made you who you are today, that made us who we are today? What are they missing out on, and what can be done, to kind of, for them to have those lifelong values even while here in the United States?
And so can we maybe bring it in terms of the values, like growing up in the setting, that African setting that you all mentioned earlier? There are some values that were gained, that were acquired in that. And the younger generation here in the United States may not have that. And so what can they learn from this experience that you had back there?
Yes. So for me personally, what I would say is being in the two side shoes, right? Both in America or outside the diaspora, and also back home, growing up in Cameroon. What I would say is there's a lot of things that they are missing. A lot of things that they are
Other
missing.
than the mangoes?
Other than there are a lot of things that they are missing. And,
Okay.
first of all, when you want to identify an issue, you need to start with the root cause, right? The root cause of what they're missing right now is technology is the root cause. But at the same time, technology is very important, but it's the extent to which we, as the parents, allow our kids for the technology to utilize them. That is the problem. So growing back home in Cameroon, I would say right up to the university, I did not have any internet or any phone or any computer to study, right? But I still acquired that knowledge from birth right up to where I am today. But out here in America, or in the diaspora in general, we have kids that they will be on their phone every single minute, or be on a tablet every single minute, which us as the parents, we are encouraging those type of activities, which is in turn messing up the kids. And that is one thing that I would say, but technology has brought life into our environment and our community. But it's the extent to which we allow, us as parents, we allow our kids to let the technology utilize them. That's the first point. The second point in terms of what they're missing out in cultural activities is because we as parents, we don't teach them where we come from. We don't teach them what we have come across from childhood.
So we don't share
our experiences.
So parents do not share their experiences with the kids. And so the kids are missing out.
They're missing out. So one thing I would say on that is, I as a president of FOIA, which is the FOIA Development and Cultural Association in the United States, precisely Dallas, what we're trying to encourage a lot of youth in this regime is for us to identify various cultural activities that will help to make our kids know our roots and our culture, where we're coming from. Because back home in Cameroon, when I was growing up, if an elder walk into a room and I'm sitting down and that's the only chair, I'll have to stand up for my elder to have that seat. But that was the respect. But right now, I bet you if you walk into a room with a child sitting right there and that's the only chair,
they'll be eating pizza.
They will not even know that you walk into that room. And they'll be sitting on that chair and you stand up and you greet them instead of them greeting you or saying hi to you, which is very bad. That is, we are losing the culture that we're coming from.
So the elderly people are not given the place that is due them.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to boil it down to two things. And that two things is going to be nature and connectivity. When I was growing up, we had the ability to be able to go out and have a good time without any tool, without any advanced technology. We had the ability to go outside in the evening when it's even dark and play, like Doctor was saying, right? Play with our neighbor. Why? Not with our neighbors, with the family members. Why? Because we were not living in a single home. You were living in a compound, and this compound had many other children that you will be able to go out with them and interact and feel with them and go to the farm with them together and walk natural soil together with them and grow natural food. So the nature part, the natural aspect of life, I think that these people here in America, these children are missing out on that a lot. Because when we came back from school, especially in the village, most of the time you don't go to the kitchen to go get food. You run to a mango tree to get mangoes. You run and get oranges. You run and get, these are all natural stuff that we, the children here, don't have it. The second thing is connectivity. And Doctor was saying that the mothers, the women, their houses were behind and were living with their children, and the father's house was in front. And most of the time, the food that you all ate, nobody had a separate dish. Right. All of you ate in one dish. Yeah. And that brought unity, that brought brotherhood, that brought you feeling your brother and really living your brother. Growing up, I didn't know what it means to be by myself. It hardly happened, right? I'm either with my cousins or with my younger brother and things like that. But here you see children, even 3, 4 of them live in the house, but they still feel so much individuality while in the midst of their brothers and sisters. So that is something that I see that is missing a lot with the people here. I see that the children here are missing. Then also culture. Doctor talked about there's no culture without language. They're missing out on that, definitely. Right. They're missing the language. They need to know the language so that they can be able to attach themselves to the culture. And the consequences of that is a lot. I know we're going to go down to that. Yeah. The consequences of these things is enormous because that individuality leads to depression and all the things that we're going to talk about down the line. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I said that the main problem that is causing what the children are losing didn't start here when they got here. It started back home. It started back home with the introduction of the modern education that we have now. The strangest thing that you will see is that that education fascinated parents. The children were learning a language that they themselves didn't know. And they ended up turning to the children like parents here today are also turning to their own children for guidance. Right? The generations now are being named by the kind of technology that is there. And because the children are now given to technology and the parents are working and having not enough time when they come back from work, the children are virtually under destruction and nobody is seeing what is happening. This started right in Bangolan. One day I come back from school and sat with his uncle by the market. And I saw young children of school age on a school day playing cards with money in the market. Then I asked him, like a typical Bangolan man would ask, what kind of market are these children in when it is not market day? Okay, because market day was once a week.
Right.
And these children are of school age, and the man indicated to me somebody I knew was very powerful, and he told me, do you know that these children beat that man? Then I said, no, you are kidding. So I stood up to go towards them. They flew like birds. Then I followed a little bit, and one who went and climbed on a veranda and stood up and was telling me over there, I was not there, but I saw him come from there. So they have learned to lie. Then I called the whole village in the meeting hall, and I said, what is happening with your children? And they told me a story I have never forgotten. They said those children are above us. I said, now that they are above you, I have heard stories about the ones who leave the village at the age of 12, 11, because they have finished elementary school. Nobody taught them how to cook. Nobody taught them how to take care of, how to wake up in the morning by themselves. Nobody taught them how to prepare school program and so on and so forth and be responsible. So they are there under destruction, and a child comes from amongst them, told me a story in Yaoundé, and I shed tears. So I took these two issues to the parents and I said, okay, can you agree with me that something is going wrong? And I said, what do you think we should do? You know what they told me? If we don't go and report them to the Mumba, what else can we do?
Wow.
The Mumba here.
The Mumba here is the secret society that runs the village. All right? Then I said, I know that children will get to a certain age before they are introduced to the Mumba. When did you introduce these children to the Mumba? How would the Mumba know them? They all kept quiet. I said, okay, I am going to propose a solution to you. The solution is that we are going to create a secondary school here. The government did not know that there are sufficient children here to enter several classes of secondary school. By the time I finished my own primary school in 1965, we were only 6 of us to write the standard 6. And now about 300 children finish primary school. So I got the statistics to the government. We created a secondary school in the village. I discovered one of those children about a week ago. You listen to his audios. And that young man, when I opened that school, he was not going to secondary school. He had finished primary school. I actually chased him in the village. He was playing football on the streets. I chased him, and he went to school. You know where he is today? He's doing a master's degree in theology in Nigeria, after having finished his first degree in theology in South Africa. Then he told me, Doctor, you are lamenting that all the school closed down. You planted seeds, the seeds bore fruits. We are so many of us. I was thinking of creating a WhatsApp group for the batch, the first batch of that secondary school. And then he sent a picture to me of the first batch. All right. So I just say that we'll come to talking about solution.
Right.
But at this point, I will come back to the language that he's talking about. The children started losing the language when the English that they learned impressed their parents. And when they move from the village primary school and they go to secondary school out of the village, that's how they are getting away from the language. They are going like that, they will never come back. Because either they go to trade and they are gone, or they go work for government, or they go to, I don't know where, but they are gone away from the village. Then they get married and they deliver their own children. They don't know what culture to teach them. All right? They don't know what culture to teach them.
Wow, that's quite interesting. And it's, we can see here that the children, the younger generation, is definitely missing out.
That's right.
So, and before we move to our last portion, I just first of all want again to really appreciate all of you, each one of you, for taking time, making time out of your busy schedules, because I know that each one of you, you're breadwinners in your homes, your respective homes, and it is not easy to kind of forego some of these heavy responsibilities, being abroad, being in the United States, to be here. But that also indicates how you have, that you're not just leaders at your various levels, but your heart is deeply connected to our cultures. So before we wrap up, so we have here with us a very important person, Ms. Nan, who actually is one of the executives or the leaders in Dream Centers. And we are so fortunate to have you be part of this cultural talk that People-Centered Lighthouse is organizing. And we are so excited even about the partnerships that is in the making between our two organizations, and that you will make time to be here. And so I know you followed all the discussions, the intergenerational discussions that have been going on concerning the African culture and the struggles and the challenges, but also the rich aspect of the values that were presented tonight. So when you listen to all of this, so from an American perspective, what is that thing that jumps to your mind?
You know, as we were doing this, and I have a huge heart for all cultures and international. I grew up in Alabama, which was probably the most racially hotbed, but always had that love, which I know is only from God. Now looking back, it placed me there, and even bring me to Dallas, where it's culturally diverse. But I think just growing up as an American too, and seeing what's happening now, there's so much division and misunderstanding, and we just don't, to me, we don't take time to really, there's preconceived ideas for sure, whatever we've grown up. I'm 60, so it's interesting because a lot of what y'all are talking about growing up, we did here. You know, we played games, we ate around the table together, I didn't have a phone till I was, you know, married. We didn't have a computer, we didn't have all those where my kids are growing up with the same technology. And I mean, obviously a lot of things are different, but as far as those values and the community and being that network, I just see all that breaking down, even within, so it goes back to, it's really the parents, and that regardless, it's been interesting because it's just regardless of the culture, those same integrated things I think that God meant for us to be in community and hold dear, and the elders and all that I can even see it in the American culture doing the same thing. Now our circumstances and, you know, the house and the being able to go and get fruit off the tree would be amazing. We have to go to a grocery store. But, and some of those are obviously, like, the physical things are different, but really just a lot of the lifestyle is different, and I can see it changing just like it has for y'all, you know. And just for us to go back, and I think when we were telling stories about the way it was, or how we, you know, whatever it was as we were growing up, for my kids, it's, you know, I had to walk 10 miles to school, or we had to do this, we didn't have a cell phone, but it's more than, to me, more than just that. It's like, why was that important? You know, why, it wasn't just that we were deprived of that, y'all should be grateful. It was more that, I don't know, I was connected to people, you know, more than on my cell phone, or, you know, like, part of my kids when they were in high school, like, you don't even know how to have a conversation. You know, you come to have people over, and then you're all sitting on the bed on your phones. So it's part of that. It's not that, because there are good things about the technology, there's good things about progress and things that we have now that we didn't have, but to me it's the underlying, you know, why is that important?
Right.
You know, it wasn't that, you know, that was a, you know, bad thing and all this, and the phones were great. I mean, we can do so many more things with technology. And I have friends all over, you know, the world, and I can talk to them on Zoom or whatever, but it's how you use it and how you value that, and what you value and what you don't value. So it's been fascinating just to hear, because, you know, like I said, the differences and the similarities, but we never sit down and have those conversations. And I think we focus more on how we're different than how we're alike.
That's right.
You know,
What
and
a
that,
powerful-
yeah,
what a
that we're, you know, if you really saw that, like I said, just hearing, that's like us. We'd stay out, you know, we'd play in the neighborhood. I mean, we didn't have the compound. I've been to places where they've, you know, had compounds, but like in our neighborhood, we'd be out till it got dark like this. We'd come in and eat, go back out. We just knew we had to be home when it got dark. But we all watched out for each other, and the kids never had a thought of, now I'm thinking, I would not let my kids be out at, you know, night and not know where they are. So a lot of that, like I said, is very similar. If you even dig down, probably a lot of, maybe you don't know how to get it, but a lot of things that you actually want for yourself or for your family are all the same. You know, and but how are you getting that, and what are you putting your value, you know, in with that, you know, that way. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, I just think this is great, and I was thinking it's just hard to get those conversations started, you know, and how do you do that, and even if you offer it, it's like, how do people engage? And I think even just, you know, there's not as, I mean, when I look back and I think there probably are traditions that we have, just like in your culture, you know, but, and it's how are we teaching that to, you know, our kids? Or are we just kind of going, and my mother was very family, she had 18 her mother had 18 brothers and sisters. So they had a huge spiritual heritage too, and they still get together for reunions. You know, we always had reunions with my family. We had, you know, tons of cousins and, you know, aunts and uncles, but that was a big thing for her to have, you know, everybody come. We were all over the country, you know, once a year to get back together. So she kept, and she had a newsletter, you know, she kept all that going and tried to keep everybody connected. But unless you have something or someone doing that, and again, it's not just telling the story. I mean, it is the stories, but it's why are those important?
Right.
You know, and it's the people and the values behind the stories of your teaching or your subtly teaching. And so I think it, like I said, it takes somebody within that. And regardless, I think if I kind of look at it and think, my kids probably heard, because I know they'll bring up stuff, they heard more than I thought they did. But as my responsibility is to, if I want them to know that, then I have to, you know, do what I can. I can't be responsible for how they take it or what they do with it. But if I've done whatever I can to bring that down through the generations, then that's really all I could do, you know, in the end.
Wow.
But it's very important. I think this is, it's so cool.
Thank you
And
so
just-
much.
Yeah, just
Thank
how
you.
it's so, and I think it's interesting, just, you know, same way within, that's why I was asking where y'all were from. Cause even in the United States, you know, or even in Texas, you go to South Texas, which I go a lot, on the border.
Right.
That's very different, you know, mindset, mentality, lifestyle than it is here.
Right.
Or you go over in the West, or we're all in the same state. You know, we're all Texans supposedly. So it's obviously within the United States, obviously within Africa, there's very different
That's right.
things.
Wow.
And the only place I've been in Africa is Uganda, in Rockeye, which we were we were talking about the clinics and all that, and we were in a very small clinic, and we did mobile clinic into the villages and stuff.
That's so important.
Yeah,
Wow.
so it's just, anyway.
So connecting. And thank you so much
Thank you
again.
so much.
Not wanting to rush us, but if there's one thing that you want to share in terms of like solution, what would that one thing be? And so I would like us to make like a final round table. We can start
Yeah, go
from
this
there,
way.
and then
Yes.
we come.
Yeah, I
to
could,
this. Yes, that's fine.
And I would just say one major thing that I would suggest that we do. I'm not campaigning for banker, but I'm saying that it's important. Yeah, I'm saying that we need to involve our kids.
Yes.
We need to put our kids in positions where they will unconsciously learn our culture, and that can happen when you communicate with them in a way that you want to transfer that culture to them. When you take them to see family and friends, when you take them to your community culture, come together, that is very, very important. This is not just verbal, but your actions, the things that you do, because all this boils down to you living a good life, and you have to do that. You have to demonstrate that to your kids. So that's how I want to
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just in alignment to that, the first thing is to actually, teach the kids, right? Not just letting them have what they want, right? But actually telling them, okay, these are the, I know in America you can't force someone to do something that much, right? But we just need to build the foundation and the baseline in terms of how we want our kids to adapt to our culture, and also bring that culture in line with them, because sometimes they don't really know what is the culture. But we need to tell them. It's our place to tell them and explain to them, and we can hold lessons with them every 30 minutes, a day or a week, just to say, okay, let's sit down and say, this is the culture. Like me, what I've said in my mind is, at my house, there is a day, like 1 hour that I spare just to teach the kids about the culture, where I come from. So that will really go a long way to help the kids as well. And sometimes I have my first son was born in Cameroon, and sometimes I just take his mind back to Cameroon, and he's gonna remember hey, this is what my grandmother told me, this is what my grandmother told me. That really helps a lot when you reflect with your kids on that type of situation. So that is a good way to do it as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, to me, after having lived so many years, to the point where I know I am living God's grace, because He said He'll give us 3 and 10, and after that we will live by His grace. In America, that's the thing, they go to 100 years. But what I am saying is that the fact that my parents thought about life after death is important, because I saw them struggle with death. Death in the village, when you found somebody died and everybody will sing, will come and sit down, and they are actually singing, crying. The songs that they are singing, they are actually singing, crying. And I say, by accident, I got to know Jesus Christ. And I say, by the time I am who I am, and my language is important, what language I communicate with my children is important. When I go back home, I can talk to my mother, I can talk to this person in the language that she understands. But at the same time, if I learn something about her own life after death, I cannot allow her just to die because she knew the culture that she taught me. That's why I told my mother, the faith that you are in, if I will do all that a son can do to a mother while you are living, if you die, I'm not coming. Then she sent a message, a recorded message to me, giving her life to Jesus Christ. And when she died, I went to Cameroon.
Wow.
And I'm saying, we have the responsibility. I took that seriously for my own children. The first day he came to my house. I didn't know who that was. He was sitting on a chair in my parlor. And then I called him to my office. And then he told me he was looking for my daughter. I said, but what do you believe in? So, the faith that he has today, he is sure of his salvation. He's not doubting about it. I'm not doubting about mine. And therefore, people are living this life as though culture were just the thing. It's not just the thing. I put something in that culture which is me. In that culture, I am going to where? When you say that somebody has eaten me, why did that person have the power to eat me? All right? I was talking about eating somebody, right? That's what they believe in the tradition, that if somebody died, somebody ate somebody. So I say, no. If you are as ignorant as you are, the only power that you have, I am working for my 4th doctorate degree now, and I can recognize the fact that I don't know what is behind this door, but God knows.
Yes.
And because He knows what is behind this door and I do not know, that young man in Nigeria, I was telling him, do you know I chased you to go to school? I don't know your mother. And she was my neighbor.
That's right. Wow.
Because I am not God. If I didn't come into real contact with her, I would not know her. Okay, so to me, bringing up children is teaching them the culture, their roots, the language they come from, and also teaching them how they are traversing this life to another life.
Wow, it is on that note that we're going to call call it for today. And one more time, we want to appreciate all our wonderful panelists who have given up their schedules, their time, and their every important thing that they could have been doing to be here to enrich our culture and share from their own personal experiences.
Yes, we believe that this is just the first. There are many more to come. So we know that so many people are definitely going to be blessed by listening to this. So thank you all again so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nam, for showing up. And we are looking forward to our next edition. And it's going to be even more wonderful than this.